Dad, it's my first time, and your pencil is too big for me. Hi, my name is Lily. I'm 18 years old. My life has always been quiet and reserved. It's just me and my dad because my mom left us many years ago. She vanished suddenly, as if she had disappeared into thin air, leaving behind only cold rooms that my father and I filled with the warmth of our love. We've always stayed close, like two boats in a storm, supporting each other. A few months ago, I started university. It was a huge step for me, a girl used to the comfort of our small world. It was overwhelming. Lectures, new friends, noisy hallways, all exciting, but also scary. My dad was proud of me, though I could see how hard it was for him to be alone. Every time I came home, his smile made my day. But university life quickly took over. I began going to parties, at first just out of curiosity. The atmosphere was so different from what I was used to. Loud music, unfamiliar faces, a sense of freedom that filled the air. It was a side of life I'd never experienced before. After one of the first parties, I came home late. The city was asleep, and my dad was in the kitchen with a cup of tea waiting for me. His gaze was soft, but I could sense a hint of worry. "How was the party?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Fun," I replied, avoiding details. He nodded, and silence filled the room. I felt a strange tension between us, but chose to ignore it. Every time I left the house at night, that feeling returned, as if he feared the world outside might change me. That evening started like any other. Music, dancing, a few drinks in hand. But this time I went further. The alcohol made me bolder, more relaxed. The world seemed to bend to my smile. When I got home late that night, the door was open. As usual, when my dad was waiting for me. He was in the living room, sitting at his laptop, his profile lit by the soft glow of a lamp. My dad always looked strong and composed, even late at night. His broad shoulders, toned body, and tattoos peeking from under his sleeves showed how he kept himself in shape. His thick, dark hair was neatly combed with a few gray strands adding charm. I tiptoed into the room and, coming up behind him, lightly touched his shoulders. "Boo," I said, barely holding back a laugh. He jumped, then chuckled, leaning forward as he always did when he was genuinely amused. "Amanda, what are you doing?" he asked, catching the scent of my perfume and alcohol. "Living life to the fullest," I giggled, feeling a bit dizzy. He stood up and turned to me, his hands warm and strong on my shoulders, as if they were made to protect me from the world. His eyes were tender, but suddenly, I felt something else. Something strange. There was something about the way his scent surrounded me, the way his smile shattered my drunken calm that made me freeze. My laughter faded as I looked up and met his gaze. That look was everything. Care, love, a hint of reproach, but something more. I quickly stepped back, trying to laugh it off. "You're always so serious. Relax." I waved my hand and headed to my room. But once behind closed doors, I lay in bed for a long time, feeling an inexplicable emotion pulsing inside me. His voice, calm but slightly stern, made me stop. "Lily, go take a shower. You need to freshen up," he said, his head slightly tilted. I nodded, trying not to stare at his strong arms crossed over his chest. My heart raced. His care had always meant more to me than just duty, but this time it felt different. I went to the bathroom, leaving the door open. My dad and I always trusted each other, and this gesture felt natural. I turned on the water, and a hot stream flowed over my body, mixing with my confused thoughts. Standing in the shower, I imagined him. His hands, which had held me so easily earlier. His smile that seemed to reach into the deepest parts of my mind. Every drop of water felt like his touch. I let the water run over my neck and shoulders, slowly moving lower, feeling the warmth fill me. My thoughts didn't stop. His image consumed me, every cell of my being. I tried to focus on the water, on the sound of it falling, but his smile and voice stayed in my mind. Suddenly, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. Through the gap in the door, my dad stood there, watching me. His gaze was soft yet intense, and a smile played on his lips, as if he didn't quite understand how he ended up there. My heart stopped. I held my breath but didn't try to hide. The water continued to flow over my skin, but now it felt like something more, as if his eyes added heat to every drop. We looked at each other as if the world had paused. I always remembered how my dad and I could communicate with just our eyes. His warm smile was the most precious thing in the world to me. Even when I was little, he would lean in and say, "Lily, you're my favorite person in the world," and wait for me to reply, "And you're mine." Those days together were special. We often went to the park, walking hand in hand as if we could shield each other from the world. I loved those walks most when we stopped at the little ice cream shop. "Chocolate," he'd say with a smile that highlighted the dimple on his cheek. I always chose chocolate too, as if it were our unspoken ritual. When the ice cream melted in my hands, he'd laugh and gently wipe my fingers with a napkin. He never spoke ill of my mom, even after she left us. He'd say, "She just chose a different life. It doesn't mean you're not important to her." But I knew it wasn't true. I saw the pain in his eyes when someone mentioned her name. He tried to hide it so it wouldn't hurt me. My mom was a shadow to me. She disappeared, leaving us, and I couldn't understand how she could leave a man who was such a perfect father. Over the years, my anger toward her grew, but he never encouraged it. He always taught me to love, even when his own heart had little left. Remembering those moments, I realized how much he shaped me. His care, his smile, his love, they became the foundation of my world. Water ran down my body in thin streams as I stood there, feeling the heat of the situation sink into my consciousness. My dad was still there, his smile almost apologetic, but he didn't look away. I felt embarrassed, but in a soft voice said, "Come in." He stepped into the bathroom, hesitating. I saw his eyes glance at me, but he quickly looked away, reaching for a towel. "You're all wet. Let me help," he said, his voice calm but with a hint of tension. He approached carefully, as if afraid to startle me, and began to dry me with the towel. First my shoulders, then my arms, slowly moving lower. His touch was familiar, yet entirely new. I looked at his face, at the sharp lines of his cheekbones and strong jaw, and felt something unfamiliar rise within me. Every movement seemed deliberate and gentle. He bent down to wipe the drops running down my neck, and I felt the warmth of his breath. A strange, thrilling sensation washed over me, as if we were in a world without rules. "This is wrong," flashed through my mind. "It's taboo. Unacceptable." But I couldn't look away. His body, which I'd always seen, now looked different. Muscles defined under his shirt, tattoos peeking from his sleeves. He was always fit, but I'd never let myself notice like this. My heart raced. He seemed to notice, pausing for a moment, still holding the towel, his eyes meeting mine. It was forbidden, but in that moment, the world seemed to forget all its rules. His hands were warm, strong, yet careful as he began to dry my hair with the towel. The tension in my body slowly melted away as his fingers moved gently through my hair, smoothing the strands with such tenderness that I couldn't help but close my eyes. Water still dripped from the ends of my hair, but every motion of his hand felt deliberate, as if he wanted to make this moment last forever. When his fingers accidentally brushed against the skin on my neck, a wave of warmth spread through me, relaxing every part of my body. The bathroom, lit by a soft glow, felt like a separate world, small and isolated from everything else. "Is this better?" he asked, his voice quiet but close. I nodded without opening my eyes, my breathing steady though my heart beat a little faster. His touch was more than just caring. It carried something deeper, something I could sense in the way his hands paused before continuing. "You need to rest," he said softly, placing the towel on my shoulders. I opened my eyes and looked up. His face was near, his gaze so intense it took my breath away. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice unfamiliar even to me. He smiled, the faint lines on his cheeks appearing, a smile that had always comforted me but now stirred something more. This moment felt fragile, almost unreal, yet unforgettable. We stood so close I could hear his breathing, warm and steady, mingling with the sound of water droplets falling from my hair. My thoughts swirled, spilling like water underfoot as time seemed to stop. leaving us alone in this small space. My eyes met his, and I noticed something I had never allowed myself to see before. It wasn't just care or love, it was something stronger, something that broke down the walls I had built in my mind. I didn't know who moved first, but it felt inevitable. I leaned forward, my heart racing, and when my lips touched his, I thought for a second he might pull away. Instead, his hands gently held my shoulders, then wrapped around me tighter. He kissed me back, softly but firmly, as if to tell me he wanted this too. Everything around us faded. Rules, boundaries, everything. There was only this feeling, wrapping us like warm steam. My heart filled with something new, something powerful. His warmth, his touch became a part of me. It no longer felt wrong. It felt as natural as breathing. When we finally pulled apart, his gaze was deeper than before, as if he had finally seen something hidden all along. "Lily," he said, his voice rough but tender, and I knew nothing would ever be the same. His hands rested firmly on my waist, and a wave of heat rushed through me. This wasn't the chaotic drunkenness from earlier. It was something entirely different. My heartbeat matched his, and every touch only intensified the feeling. I looked at him, and there was no doubt in his eyes. Everything I had held back, everything I had tried to ignore, was now out in the open. He felt it too. I could see it in the way his fingers hesitated but couldn't stop. My mind was clear, the alcohol long gone, but I felt a new kind of intoxication, a passion that had taken hold of us both. My breathing grew heavier as he drew me closer. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice low, almost afraid to break the moment. I nodded, but it wasn't enough. I placed my hand on his chest, feeling his heart pound as fiercely as mine. "Yes," I whispered. His hands moved higher, sliding along my sides, still careful as if he feared I might vanish like morning mist. But I was there, every part of me alive for this moment. The water still ran down us as he carried me out of the bathroom. The air felt cool compared to the heat of our bodies, but all I could feel was him. His steps were quiet but sure as he took me to his room. He laid me on the bed gently, as if this were a sacred ritual. His hand brushed my face, resting on my chin, and he leaned down to look into my eyes. "Lily," he said, his voice deep and filled with warmth. I pulled him closer, unable to bear even a second apart. Now, nothing stood between us. We became one, and it was more than passion. It was an acknowledgement of something that had always been there. The room was silent except for our breaths, the soft light from the curtains wrapping us in warmth, making it feel as though this moment existed outside of time. The bed beneath us felt like an island in a vast world left far behind. He leaned closer, his breath barely touching my skin. His hand moved over my body, confident yet gentle, as if memorizing every curve. His touch was so light that every part of me responded, pulsing with warmth. My heart pounded so loudly I thought he might hear it, but in his eyes there was no rush, only endless tenderness. His gaze was so deep I felt exposed, more than just physically. His fingers traced my face, running down my cheeks before stopping at my chin. He tilted my face up, and our eyes met. There was something unspoken but powerful in that moment, a silent agreement that nothing held us back anymore. He bent down and our lips met again, this time in a kiss that was deeper, slower, filled with a tenderness that overwhelmed me. His hands moved down my shoulders, every touch so deliberate it made me lose control. It was as if he knew exactly how I felt and responded with such care that my body trembled beneath him. The air between us grew hotter, charged with an invisible energy that felt almost magical. Our movements were slow, deliberate, as if we wanted to remember every second. We were united in this space, and it felt completely real. His warmth surrounded me, and I knew I would never forget this. He was pure, boundless. We lay side by side, the silence around us speaking louder than words. His hand rested lightly on my waist, and I stared at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My thoughts were tangled, caught between reality and what it all meant. But in that moment, I felt no shame or guilt. only the warmth and peace he always brought to my life. I turned to look at him. His face was calm, but his eyes said everything. "I know," he said quietly, as if he already understood what I wanted to say. I felt it too. Maybe it's wrong, but... He didn't finish. It wasn't necessary. Everything had already been said in our touches, our looks. "What now?" I asked, my eyes locked on his. His expression softened and he smiled slightly, brushing my hair. "We take our time," he said. "We live as we always have, but now we know." I nodded, understanding. This moment was ours, a secret no one else would ever know. It wasn't something I could forget or bury. It had become a part of me. He pulled me closer and I rested my head on his shoulder. His heartbeat was slow and steady, calming me. Though there were still questions ahead, I knew one thing for sure. This was our moment, our secret, and nothing could take it away. We lay there, the air between us filling with something new, something invisible but undeniable. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was a quiet witness to something no one else would ever understand. His hand gently stroked my waist, reassuring me that this was real, something we had chosen to embrace. I looked into his face, searching for confirmation that he felt it too, and I found it in the lines around his eyes, in the faint smile on his lips. "Aren't you sorry?" I whispered, barely daring to ask. His eyes met mine, filled with a confidence I lacked. "Sorry?" "No, Lily. Not about what's real." His words erased any lingering doubt. We didn't talk about the future or make plans, but I knew this would stay with us forever. I closed my eyes, feeling his breath blend with mine. The world outside felt quieter, calmer, and though I didn't know what would come next, I was certain of one thing. This moment belonged only to us. His fingers traced my waist, leaving a trail of warmth that echoed through every part of me. His breath brushed my skin, and I let the moment consume me, merging us into one.